Andrea slapped her palms on her thighs and took a deep breath to show her disgust. I just thought you'd want to get out of the house. Face it, Jen, you haven't been anywhere in weeks. You can't hang out in your house forever. A cool breeze skimmed over Jenna's bare feet and legs. She wanted to tell Andrea that yes, she could hang out in her house forever, and she might have just said that if Andrea hadn't gripped the side of the hammock again and began tugging it back and forth. Jenna grabbed the sides and held on. Are you listening to me? Andrea shouted. I mean, Jen, there have been parties practically every night around here. How are you going to meet any seniors if you don't go to parties? Jenna didn't respond. She doubted she'd ever want to go to another party for as long as she lived. At parties, she would have to pretend that everything was fine, as if her father's death had just been some brief interruption in her life and now everything was back to normal. It would be too painful. Andrea locked her arms across her chest. I'm not going to give up until you say you'll go to the pool with me. I'll come over here every day and drive you crazy until you say yes, she said, thrusting her chin forward. Jenna had to laugh. She knew how stubborn Andrea could be. She'd nag her until she gave in. Jenna also understood that her friend was only trying to help. Okay, she said finally. I'll go. Happy now? Ecstatic, Andrea said, standing up. And she did look pleased, as if she had completed some secret mission. I'll come over about 10, okay? Right, 10. Jenna watched her friend cross the yard. Then she lay back, closed her eyes, and imagined Jason had been the one to wander into the yard that evening instead of Andrea. When Jenna went inside a few minutes later, she headed straight for the refrigerator. Neither she nor her mother had bothered much with regular meals, eating only when they thought of it, which wasn't often. Jenna hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. She studied the casserole dishes and the endless stacks of Tupperware filled with soups and salads. Edible condolences from friends and neighbors. Even now, people were still stopping by unexpectedly to leave freshly baked blueberry muffins or a tortellini salad. Jenna wondered if it would ever end. Overwhelmed by the profusion of colored plastic, she reached for the most convenient container, which happened to be filled with potato salad that had gone bad. She gagged and stuffed the salad back into the refrigerator. Finally, without giving it much thought, she slapped together a peanut butter sandwich, then tossed the gummy knife into a sink full of unwashed dishes. The house was silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator as she wandered from room to room, idly chewing the sandwich. Dozens of wilting flower arrangements sent by well-meaning friends, in spite of the family's request that the money be donated to charity instead, still sat on tables in the living room and dining room. The water in their containers had become stagnant. The 2 rooms smelled sour. Jenna held her nose as she walked through. When she reached the family room, she found her mother asleep on the couch. A half-eaten slice of whole wheat toast, thinly coated with grape jelly, sat on a plate on the floor. A tiny blob of jelly stained the front of her mother's light blue t-shirt. On the floor, in front of the couch, lay a flower print comforter. Jenna shivered, stuffed the last bite of her sandwich into her mouth, and rubbed her upper arms. The room was ice cold. The air conditioner was on full blast, as usual. She lifted the comforter from the floor and gently laid it over her mother. Meredith Ward blinked and, with eyes only half open, said, Jen? Yeah? Her mother nuzzled her cheek against one of the throw pillows. Did you have dinner yet? Jenna wiped the peanut butter from her fingers onto her shorts. Yeah. Good. Her mother's eyes closed again. Jenna stood for a while, her arms dangling limply at her sides, watching her mother. During the past few weeks, they had been unusually careful with each other. There had been no arguments, no scenes, yet Jenna felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness. She hesitated for a moment, then said, Mom? Have you ever wondered why? I mean, why us? Why Daddy? She had been plagued by these questions, but hadn't dared to ask them out loud. Her mother was awake now. She sat up, shoving the comforter into a ball at the end of the couch, then stared at it for a few minutes. Jenna saw that the rims of her eyes were swollen and red. She envied her mother her tears. Finally, her mother said, I don't have an answer for that, Jen. Is it something we did? I mean, I know this sounds really childish, but I can't help but feeling like we're being punished. Meredith reached for Jenna's hand and pulled her down beside her on the couch. I know I'm supposed to say something reasonable, like there aren't any simple answers to these things, they just happen. It's not because of anything we did. She began to pick at the dried jelly on her t-shirt. Her eyes grew moist. I never realized before how ridiculously simplistic those words sound. She rubbed her eyes. I'm sorry. I'm not being very helpful, am I? It's okay, Mom. It'd be worse if you started spouting all those hollow cliches just to make me feel better. Her mother took a deep breath. What keeps going through my mind is, I did everything I was supposed to do, and this is how it turns out. I feel, I don't know, cheated somehow. Jenna shook her head. I don't understand. What do you mean, everything you were supposed to do? Meredith continued to scrape at the stubborn jelly stain. Jenna saw that her mother had been picking at the skin around her cuticles. Her fingers looked raw. I'm not sure, really. I suppose I thought all I had to do was play by the rules. If I worked hard, if I was a good wife and mother, if I was good at my job, kept a neat house. Her voice trailed off. She pulled a soggy tissue from her pocket and blew her nose. I guess what I thought was, if I did all those things, we'd all live to a ripe old age. She snorted a little laugh and then looked over at Jenna. Her mouth was twisted in an awkward half smile. Jenna tried to think of something to say, but no words would come. Her mother leaned over and brushed a strand of Jenna's hair behind her ear. Marge Evans from work told me that I shouldn't think of myself as a victim. She says what happened to us is a part of life. Yeah, the rotten part. Meredith squeezed her eyes shut and pressed her hands hard against her mouth. After a few minutes, she said, I'm so sorry, Jen. I wish you hadn't seen me like this. I'm supposed to be the strong one. I should be comforting you, and here I am. Oh, God, I must sound so angry, but I can't help it. I keep thinking I failed him in some way, that there was something I should have done, and if I'd only done it, he'd still be here. Jenna felt as if her entire body had been weighted down with rocks. She wasn't even sure she'd be able to get off the couch when the time came. There's nothing you could have done, Mom. Her mother reached for the comforter at the end of the couch and stretched it across both of them. She pulled the edge up beneath her chin and lowered her face into the soft folds. Jenna let her head flop against the back of the couch and closed her eyes. I still keep expecting him to come home. Her mother sighed softly. Me too, she said. Jenna entered her bedroom an hour later without turning on the light. She had been doing this ever since the evening she'd noticed the boy sitting on the front steps of the church across the street. The first time she saw him from her bedroom window had been 2 days after her father's death. He had been sitting on the top step, leaning back against the church doors. Jenna thought he looked familiar, but at the time she hadn't paid much attention. 2 evenings later, he was there again. At first she hadn't been sure it was the same person. The second time she saw him, the boy had his arms wrapped around his legs, which were drawn up to his chest, and his forehead pressed against his knees. But when he finally stretched his legs forward, letting his head fall back against the door, the setting sun spilled over his face, and she knew for certain it was the same boy. She thought she recognized him from school, although she didn't know his name. She had wondered what he was doing waiting outside the church, then decided he was probably meeting someone. But on the evenings when he showed up, and she had counted 10 so far, Jenna never saw anyone else. And when she looked out her window after dark, he would always be gone. So she really had no way of knowing if the person he was waiting for had come or not. Tonight, the streetlight cast leafy shadows on the empty stone steps of the church. If the boy had been there earlier, he had already left. Still, she had to wonder why he came.